the focus shifts from what a watch means moving outwards to what a watch means pointing inwards.
This is Openwork, a look inside the watch industry, a podcast from Collective Horology. I'm Gabe Riley, co-founder of Collective.
And I'm Asher Epkin, co-founder of Collective. Collective Horology is an independent watch retailer based in Southern California. We carry a wide range of independent brands, including Chapek, Ming, and Holton-Ricks. To learn more about us, check out our available inventory and visit collectivehorology.com.
Holton-Ricks, man.
Holton-Ricks, man.
This is a brand we've talked about a lot on the podcast, and they've technically been in our shop since, was it maybe back in October when we first got our delivery for them? We haven't sort of officially launched Holton-Ricks because we can't lock these watches down. As soon as they come in, they're sold. And fortunately, we have another batch of watches that's going to come in for delivery at the beginning of next year, likely around February. And we're probably going to constantly be in this dilemma where Holton-Ricks watches don't stick around forever. So at some point, we have to officially launch them. So we've done that, and as part of doing that, we've not only added Holton-Ricks to our site and all that stuff, but we've developed a new video series for YouTube, which we're starting with Holton-Ricks, but we'll do for other brands and other watches as well. The series is called The Watches Of, and it's a video series where you and I together kind of look at, discuss, and go hands-on with a brand. And, we've done a lot of product-specific review videos on YouTube, which are great and helpful and have all the information on what's the lug to lug and what's the movement and how many hours of power reserve, and that information is helpful. But we haven't really done something where we look at the brand overall and talk about like the brand's philosophy, what makes them unique, why we love them and carry them, and why the brand at a high level is worth considering. So that's what we've done here. It was a lot of fun making that video, and as part of it, we had your own personal signature ornament in the video. That's the only watch we could get our hands on. So I really enjoyed doing it. If you want to learn more about Holton-Ricks and check out that video series, you can go to collectivehorology.com, or you can visit us on YouTube. Check it out.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Asher's already watched the video, so sounds good to him. All right, guys. Well, today we're joined by our sales director, Geoff Souder. He's here with us in Ventura, and we figured, why not discuss what it's like to sell independent watches from the perspective of someone who has sold traditional watches. Geoff has a long and storied career in watch retail. Asher and I were customers of Geoff's before he ever worked a day at Collective. That's how we knew him and how we knew he was a great salesperson and the kind of person we wanted to work at Collective. So Geoff, welcome back to Openwork.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
And welcome to Ventura. It's nice to have you here with us. For those who don't know, Geoff essentially works remotely from the East Coast, and a few times a year he's out here in Ventura to spend time with us, which is great. And it's always a pleasure. Thank you for making the trip.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the great weather, because it's not pleasant in New Jersey right now.
Yeah, no, this is a definite weather upgrade. So I think before we get into what it's like to sell independent watches, why don't we start with what's it kind of like, and what's your experience selling more kind of traditional mainstream watch brands?
It's a good question. My career started selling Seiko and Citizen, and not the cool Seiko and Citizen. I'm talking about the battery operated kind of older style ones.
That's the cool Seiko and Citizen.
So I kind of went through that up into, the Rolex and Patek and Longas and that sort of stuff. And there's an art and a craft to what they do and how they make watches. But I think that when you look at Rolex, or when you look at Omega, or when you look at some of these lines that make similar products and make incremental changes over the years, you start to understand that the language doesn't change very much. It just kind of feels very stable, I guess is the right way to put it. And I don't want to say that that's a bad thing, but it just feels very much like something that rolls off a conveyor belt that feels very static and safe and comfortable. And when you first walk into the doors of a retailer like this, it feels like the world is just opening up to you. But over the years, you just kind of find that it becomes a little bit more repetitive and I guess the word I'm looking for is there isn't a lot of change that's involved with doing stuff like this. So it's kind of the feeling that you get working there is.
One thing that I've noticed going into certainly Rolex and Patek boutiques over the last few years, and this has certainly been true for, I would say certainly for at least 10 plus, but really noticeably so in the last 5 to 10 years, is a certain homogeneity that exists in that space and that is dictated by those brands. So for example, when I walk into a Rolex boutique, so not a multi-brand store, but a Rolex boutique, there is a pretty consistent look and feel. I believe those materials themselves are sold by Rolex directly to the retailers for when they do their build-outs and installations. Patek lately, salons are looking also more consistent in their feel from a material standpoint, a design standpoint. I understand that. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's no different than if I go to a BMW dealership, for example, that has consistency in design. I'm curious, though, do you find that to be, I mean, one way to look at it, and maybe this is the cynic in me saying that feels like it is, homogenous, but there's a reason they do it.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about why it is so important to some of these brands that there be consistency, that if you walk into Zadok's or you walk into Watches of Switzerland's Rolex boutiques, that they feel similar, if not the same?
Yeah.
And by the way, I've never been to Zadok's boutique. I'm just pulling their name out of a hat, but just saying.
Yeah, I think it all starts from a good place, right? So these brands are really heavily invested in making sure that their clients have a great experience. They want to, from the boardrooms in Switzerland and Germany and wherever else they may be, they want to make sure that a client walking into any one of their points of sale has a high-end luxury experience with their watches. And I genuinely believe that that's what they're trying to accomplish. But the way that you have to do that when you've got 1,000 doors or more across the world is you have to create a standard look for the shop, which becomes ubiquitous. And then you have to come up with a standard approach by the salespeople, which is also ubiquitous. So what you'll end up finding is that instead of getting a high-end experience, what you get is a homogenous experience. It's a scripted thing that is dictated by the brands themselves to make sure that everyone gets the same kind of experience when they walk through that door. That's why when you're in New York, San Francisco, Tokyo, Germany, when you walk into a Rolex dealer, they greet you at the door. They say hello. They offer you a drink of water. They walk you into the store. They introduce you to the brand. All of these things are laid out in a script that's intended to give good experiences, but ends up feeling kind of like you said BMW. I would go with Starbucks.
Yeah.
Well, we once got our hands actually on one of those scripts. So it's a long and circuitous story, but one point a number of years ago, Asher and I got our hands on a training document from one of the big Swiss holding companies, from one of the brands inside those holding companies. I won't say which one, but it's a major brand, part of a major holding company, that literally described their sales procedure for boutiques, both company-owned and operated and independent retailers. And it was probably a 30 to 40-page document that laid out everything from the words a salesperson is supposed to use to greet someone to what specifically they're supposed to offer someone when they come through the door, how things like bottled water, sparkling and still, need to be presented to the client, or espresso needs to be presented to the client. All sorts of procedures, almost like, I think a lot of people think cynically about how like a call center works and like how everyone at a call center is just reading off of a script. And this is the same idea, to have uniformity. When you call business X, they have thousands of people answering the phone. There's probably a lot of turnover. They want consistency. So there's a script, for better or worse. There quite literally is a script when you're working in these retail environments, typically for these large brands. And, when you first mentioned this, I was like, oh yeah, I guess the product does kind of get dull after a while. Like, how many subtle variations to like a Rolex bezel color can you really deal with and consider innovative? But then you start to point out, Asher, you're right, the store environment is the same. It doesn't change. The color scheme doesn't change. It's the same. And then even like what you're told to do and how you're asked to greet people and the way you're supposed to present sparkling water
and how you
doesn't
look.
And how you look. There are standards. I think some brands again, I don't know because I never worked in one of these environments, maybe thank God, but like there are grooming standards as well. It's like being on the New York Yankees, like you're expected to look a certain way. It's like being an airline, a flight attendant back in the day. It actually starts to sound almost like an episode of Severance to some extent.
Yeah, but you know what though? I'm hearing this and and those who listen may be surprised that I'm the one actually pushing back in defense of some of these brands, but I kind of get it. I get it. If you're making 1 million plus watches a year, the way Rolex is, and you have hundreds of doors, maybe, I don't know how many they have now, but maybe 1,000 globally, but let's say hundreds of doors. And when you look on any rating scale, Rolex is rated as one of the top 5, top 10 most valuable brands in the world. I understand why there's a desire to protect that.
I do as well, and I've seen the dark side of it. When I worked in the car industry, I worked for a brand and worked on consulting them on how to improve their dealership experience and like how to overcome a lot of like bad experiences that people have at car dealers. And a lot of it was just getting much more strict with a lot of these things, like how clients are meant to be greeted, how the showroom needs to be presented, all this stuff. So I get it. I get that it works for the brand.
Yeah.
I get that it works for the customer. My point is, it's probably not that fun to work in that kind of, that's what I'm saying, is like the experience of working there maybe isn't that great.
I think I may be coming off sounding a little negative about this, and I want to be clear. I'm not. I don't think that there's another way to do this that gets to the same results that they have. When you have that many watches, when you have that many doors, when you have that much to manage, there isn't really much of a better way to do this. I think that the issue comes into play when you have a person that wants to work at a boutique and they only sell one brand and that's what they do every day. They walk in, they talk about that brand, and then they go home and that's it. That's one thing. But when you have somebody who actually enjoys selling, and when I say selling, I don't mean the cheesy used car guy, right? I'm talking about somebody who actually likes making relationships, finding out about clients, presenting them relevant things. I think that's the kind of person that will never function in that environment long term, because there is no freedom and there is no flexibility.
Well, so that was kind of where I wanted to go, because if we think about, and we'll keep using Rolex as a good example, if we think about like just 2 West Coast Rolex dealers, for example, for whom, that I've been a customer of, right? So talk about like Polachek's in Calabasas and Lichten Sons up in the Bay Area. These are 2 family-owned businesses led by 2 really wonderful people whose personalities are very different. And these are both people who I genuinely on a social level, like really like, who have been really kind to us at Collective, like great people, but really different. And in some ways are different because they're from very particular parts of the country that have a personality. Calabasas has a personality, San Jose and the Bay Area totally has a personality. And I'm just curious, in your experience, like, how does that come through, right? Because if there is such a regimented structure, for example, in how things must be presented, where is personality invited by some of these brands?
I mean, I don't think it is. Like that's the whole problem is I think that the one size fits all good experience around the world, as you look at that, that's where it starts falling apart a little bit. You're right. Calabasas is different from New York, which is different from Tokyo, which is different from London. But I think that what these brands are trying to do is create the same exact experience everywhere you go. And I don't really see a lot of room for individual salespeople, the culture of a particular store or an owner or the community that they live within. I don't really see a lot of room for them to express those values and those things in a way that, like what you're asking. To me, it feels very much, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. Get on the boat or get off.
But the flip side of that, and, because if I was listening to this, I'd be thinking like, well, why bother? But I think the flip side of that is because when you throw the doors open, people walk in. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty significant distinction from what we see with independent boutiques. You throw the doors open, that doesn't necessarily mean someone's going to walk in.
Yeah.
Personality or otherwise.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And then on top of that, like, I feel like we keep saying Rolex, but this is true of Patek, IWC, all these other big box brands. I think that their fundamental thing is that they want to make clients for Rolex and IWC. I don't know that they particularly care about which door they're walking into.
That's interesting. So if you were to, that's an interesting question. So if you were to ask someone in leadership at Patek Philippe, if a client who bought a Patek at a authorized dealer that sells them is a client of that dealer or a client of Patek, what would they say?
I think it's 100% a client of Patek. I think that Patek probably will err towards giving it to the retailer. But so when you walk into a boutique in London or in France and you try to buy a watch, they refer you back to the dealer. So that's, on one level, that's them respecting that dealer relationship. But I feel like they look at that client as a Patek client. Fundamentally.
That's actually one thing we'll talk a little bit about what your experience has been selling independent watches, but that I think is one key difference with independents. They're small, they're subscale. To your point, Asher, when an independent retailer throws open the showroom door, no one is walking in off the street to check out watches like you would, wander into a Rolex boutique or what have you, or IWC boutique or whatever it might be. And I think I see an acknowledgement among the brands that we work with that the real value of the retailers are their clients. And the brands generally acknowledge that what the retailer brings is clients in a book of business. We were once talking a while ago to another independent watch retailer for whom we have tremendous respect. And I remember you telling me your conversation with him was very much focused on getting his advice on, recruiting brands and bringing more brands into our store. And he stopped you and was like, Asher, your most important asset aren't your brands or what we call our line card, the roster of brands you carry. Your most important asset, what you need to think about are your clients. That's your most important asset. And that's one thing that I do see respected among the independent watch brands, that in my experience, and I've had some experience professionally working with larger watch brands, they view them as their clients and they view it as a privilege to sell it. And they view, in many cases, the retailers as a necessary evil or a means to an end, which I think is a key mindset difference, thankfully, between independents.
I mean, look, I think some clients think that too. I think some clients view retailers as yes, a necessary evil or a means to an end.
And there are clients, we know, there are clients who would much rather be a client of the brand directly than work with an authorized dealer, regardless of whatever the benefits or reasons for working with an authorized dealer might be. And I guess, on some level, I get that. I want to talk a little bit about this transition, this change you made from working for decades, selling large brands to independent watches. And I guess I'll start by saying or asking, what did you think it was going to be like selling independent watches? And what did it end up being like? And it's a little bit of a leading question because I think we all know here, like you're a fantastic salesperson. You're truly passionate about watches. You're truly passionate about independence, but it was a rough adjustment at first. It was very different. So I'm kind of curious, like, what did you think it was going to be like? And in the first kind of weeks and months, what did you realize it actually is like selling independent watches? How's it different?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I made the jump into independence, I had no frame of reference. So it felt very much like jumping off of a cliff into the void. So I didn't really know what to expect. My thought was, the watches are really cool. The art is really cool. This particular company, is pretty cool. My bosses are sitting here, so. But, it felt to me like there was a lot of stuff going on. And where I landed was in a desert with nothing around. And I realized that.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is when you're selling Rolex, you open up the front doors every morning, or Patek, or IWC or whatever. And throughout the day, 100 people walk in, and out of those 100 people, you could probably sell something to 10 of them, maybe more, maybe less. And the next day you walk in and it's the same thing. And so it's very much a forest. There's birds flying around everywhere. I'm speaking metaphorically, obviously, Sure. But there's a lot of directions to explore, and there's a lot of opportunities to sell. And when you land in independence, you quickly realize that you have to go out and find your place. You have to find your people. You have to hunt it down. You have to go find water. You have to go find food. You have to do all of these things. And the first thing that I noticed, and this was true when I was in the other store too, but it was kind of an auxiliary true as opposed to a primary truth, is that I was responsible for finding everything myself. I had to go out and figure out exactly where it was, and there was not going to be an opening of the door. I had to go knock on the doors. And I think that that's a fundamental shift moving from one to the other, is going from a place where people come to you to a place where you have to go to people was a very, very big shift for me mentally, physically, theoretically, philosophically, and everything else. And I think that that probably was the hardest moment in my transition to this, because I thought that there would be some amount of people coming in, and I quickly realized about 2 weeks in that that wasn't going to happen. So I needed to go out and figure it out.
I wonder how it also impacted the way you talk about watches themselves and product themselves. It's funny, when we talked on a previous episode of Openwork about going to the Patek Salon in Geneva. And it was don't get me wrong, it was a wonderful experience and a joy to see some cool watches. But we were talking about it with a friend of ours in the industry. And when we were in Geneva, and he's like, let me guess, you went to the Patek Salon and you were greeted by some very attractive Swiss woman or man in their mid to late 20s who presented the product to you in a completely scripted manner with absolutely dead eyes. And he was right. That actually is quite literally what happened. It was extremely professional, but it was there was no there. It was clear that the woman who again took the time, was very generous and was very professional, this was a very kind of scripted and a rote procedure, down to the way she described a watch and its
I wasn't allowed
value
to touch the watch
proposition
until she'd given me the 3 to 5 points I needed to know about it.
Exactly. It was rehearsed. And I know that other brands do this as well, where there's a way a watch needs to be presented and shown to a client.
And to be clear, this wasn't a complicated watch that maybe I could have broken if I didn't follow the right order of operations.
It was a time-only watch.
Time-only watch.
Yeah. It was a Cubitus, for instance, was one of the watches.
Sorry, an elbow?
So, how do you go from presenting a watch in an environment where even the words you use to describe the watch to someone and sell it to someone? And I know it's not like, I seriously doubt that was all that you did, was just show them the watch, say what it is and what metal it was made of and blah, blah, blah. But how does the way you even talk to a client about products change when you're selling an independent versus a more mainstream watch?
I think the first thing that has to change is the way that I look at watches. So when you have a Daytona in your hand, or a Rolex or a Calatrava or something like that, there's the average client, and I understand that there's exceptions to this, but the average client sees that as an outward projection of something. They see it as an outward projection of success or wealth, or I can get this, or this is really cool, check it out. There's a projection to the world around you. And the first thing that I realized when I bought the watch that's on my wrist right now, which is actually a Chapek, is that the focus shifts. The focus shifts from what a watch means moving outwards to what a watch means pointing inwards. And as soon as I understood that, I think everything shifted for me, where I could have these conversations that were a little bit different. Because now we're not talking about how rare a watch is, or the steel of the watch, or the kind of movement that the watch is, or anything like that. We're talking about art. And I think getting to art, getting to reflection, getting to who I was as a client and what I see in a watch that reflects back to me, allowed me to kind of create my own internal idea of how to talk to other clients about what drives them internally, not externally.
So this comes around to something that I think you and I have talked about a lot, which is the difference between being a customer and being a patron, right? Because to a certain degree, what you're describing, with let's say like a Daytona or a 5811 or whatever, these are watches that are highly coveted. There's a lot of people that want them. Having one is being part of an in club. You know what I mean? Like you have been rewarded as a customer with this rare object for, whatever reason that got you there, versus an independent at maybe a similar price point which is, maybe maybe it will be worth something in the future. Maybe it won't, financially speaking, but that's not part of the calculus, relatively speaking, because essentially what you're doing is, at least the way I think about it, is supporting the artist that made it. And you bought it because you like it, because you believe in it, and because you think that the amount of money you're paying for it is represented in the quality of the product you got back, even if it doesn't say anything to anybody else. But when you're talking to a client, it's great to say that as an abstraction, but on a day-to-day basis, that's a significant consideration. I remember the first time I bought a serious, an expensive independent watch. It was a Grunefeld. And that was the first time I'd spent that much money. And I had to make a decision internally before I bought that watch, just before we were retailers, that I would probably never see that money again, and I had to be okay with that. And I was, and I loved that watch, it was an incredible piece. So I just wonder, as you've evolved in talking to, your time here and talking to partners and talking to clients, does that, could you ever imagine a similar kind of conversation about a large brand? And alternatively, do you find that clients of those larger brands can internalize the idea of being a patron? Where do you see that break happen?
I think, and I have to speak in generalities here because we sold thousands and thousands of watches, and there's going to be an exception to any definitive rule that I make. But I think,
and to be clear, I love independence. I also own a no date sub.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I also want to state that there's nothing wrong with any way to buy a watch.
Nope.
If you put on a 5811 and you find the design and the artistry to be absolutely exquisite and you enjoy wearing it, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you put on that same watch and because you want everyone in the room to look at you and know that you're the boss, that's fine. I'm not judging anybody. What I am saying is that the people that I talk to tend to think a little bit deeper about watches. They tend to think about where the abstractions come from, where the inspirations come from, the story of the vendors. And I don't see that. I don't remember a lot of conversations like that happening, when I was talking about Patek and Rolex. There's a brief thing about, some talking points about a nonprofit.
I was just thinking about that. I'm like, what percentage of Rolex buyers know who Hans Wilsdorf is?
Probably some, because it was a talking point for a while that was supposed to bring up, but
interesting.
Ultimately they know Hans Wilsdorf was the guy that started Rolex. They know that it's a nonprofit. These were the things that you set up while you were storytelling, and then you moved on to the next thing, which was the collections, and then blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But the deeper understanding of all of these things, I don't really feel like I got into a lot of conversations about that kind of stuff. And in independence, I do. We recently found a client for a Holtenrichs watch, and he likes the watch. I mean, don't get me wrong, but he bought it because of Michael's story. He read about Michael's story. He understood it. He had a deep appreciation for Art Nouveau art, and he understands the genesis of the watch. But what really got him on that watch was understanding Michael's story and how much he dedicated himself to making that brand happen with no exception, with no pause whatsoever. And I can't think of a single watch that I sold in the previous 25 years of my career where the deciding factor on whether somebody would put their money on something was the story of that particular person that started the company.
It's interesting. I mean, so you've described a mindset change that happened within yourself, not just selling independent watches, but becoming an independent watch enthusiast and collector yourself. The mindset difference between the average punter at buying a mainstream watch and someone who has a different philosophy about watches and collecting as an independent watch collector. Asher, I think you describe it personally, like the people who buy independent watches, whether they would describe it this way or not, I do think are kind of patrons.
Yeah.
Versus
at every level,
a watch customer or watch buyer. There's also a mindset difference among the brands themselves. And I remember the three of us and Ellie on our team, we went out to dinner in New York City when we were there for watch time, went to Chinatown. Asher took us to Chinatown. We went out to dinner.
Whoa-hop.
Yeah, we went out to dinner, whoa-hop, with Michael Holzenrichs, as well as Robert Punkenhofer from Karlsuki. And the conversation, we had a business conversation at dinner. All we did was talk about watches and the business. But the conversation we had, I literally felt like I was like trapped in some Woody Allen movie, like eating it around the table in Chinatown, discussing watches as art. And most of the conversations I've had with people who work at large watch brands is about, they're really marketing conversations. It's about the brand and how the brand is represented and what the new boutique build out model concept is, and how they're approaching social media and all. Like, those are so many of the conversations I had with people at large brands in my career, and still even out Collective when we've worked with large brands to do collaborations in the past. But we literally just sat there for 2 hours eating Chinese food, talking about watches as art. It was like, that is the motivation of the people on the industry side as well, which is very different.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. And as you're saying that, I was just thinking too about like the other folks, who are established independent retailers in the United States right now, and how profoundly different each of us are from one another. Personality wise, approach, style, line card, which by the way, like I love that for many reasons. As I still collect watches, and as a consumer, I think that's really cool, because if you vibe with Martin Pulley, or you connect with what, Steven Silver has built, or you're really excited about like the depth of knowledge that Jeremy Oster has, or if you are excited about like the way that we sell or what have you, like there is a different personality.
Yeah, clients self-select and the brand self-select too.
Yeah, and I'm curious for your point of view on that, because as I think about it, like it's more akin in some ways to like upscale menswear, in the sense that it's sort of a weird parallel, but the Armory is not the same as Sid Mashburn, is not the same as, X, Y, and Z. And people choose not just based on their own aesthetic, but also based on the vibe. Like I am utterly confident that there are clients out there who are right for us and who will like us. And I'm utterly confident that there are clients out there who might be like, yeah, those guys, it's not my scene. And I kind of like that polarization, because I think it means you have a defined personality that is reflective of and the products that you sell are therefore reflective of that personality, which does seem to be a significant difference as well when we look at like a multi-brand boutique, like Watches of Switzerland, that sells 15 different brands, for example, and the reality of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, even though obviously the people who are there probably are very passionate, do care very much about the watches that they're selling, are excited about that, but exist within the constraint of the create, the environment that is that they have to inhabit.
Yeah.
It's an interesting distinction. And of course, I mean, look, as we say all this, like I also recognize my own bias here. Like obviously I like selling independent watches. That's why we sell them. So I tend to gravitate more towards the gonzo style of watch sales than I do the traditional style of watch sales. But
yeah, but you're not only drawn to independent watches. And what are you wearing right now? Do you have a watch on?
Yeah, okay, I'm wearing a vintage Vacheron.
You're wearing a vintage Vacheron. I'm wearing a Rolex and modern Rolex, and Geoff is wearing a Chapek. I think like
I just like watches. I mean,
yeah, we just like watches. Yeah. It's not. I don't think you or I or anyone here, or really most people who collect watches, are like, I'm only into independence or whatever. But I think the people who do support independence have a different feel. Like, what if someone has an independent watch in their collection? Yeah. Regardless of whatever else is in their collection, like we know people who are really into indies, and then like we have one client who has some amazing indies, and then for instance is also like a really diehard IWC collector, right? I think if you have an indie in your collection, you're going to have a fundamentally different mindset about watch collecting, and that doesn't mean you can't collect other watches. Whereas if all you have in your watch box at home, and again, Geoff, I agree with you, there's no value judgment on this, but if all you have in your watch box at home are mainstream watches, you're likely to have a different outlook on watch collecting. Neither one is better, they're just different.
I want to do a little thought experiment here. I'm curious. Let's say for a moment that you now are managing a Rolex or a Patek boutique again. Okay. But the constraints that Rolex and Patek apply in terms of the way that you have to talk about the product and sell it, and and maybe even the environment that you go into is different, right? So in my head, I'm picturing like Gibson guitars, which are sold by a multitude of retailers all around the world. And if you want if you want consistency, you go to Guitar Center. If you want something else, you go to the mom and pop. But it's still a Gibson guitar. It's a high-end guitar, generally speaking. So let's say that you're walking in, but now, so you're free of those constraints. The only thing that's important that is product knowledge and passion. Those are the two things that you cannot compromise on. How does that change the reality of the marketplace for those watch brands, or does it not at all?
Well, I mean, look, it's kind of putting us it's kind of putting me in a difficult position to answer that, because you have you guys described yourselves the dead-eyed person at the Patek boutique. Imagine that person did exactly that job, but instead of feeling like she was in the myth of Sisyphus pushing that rock up and down that hill over and over and over again, she was actually excited to say all of those things that she said to you. She believed in the brand. She understood the value proposition. She tailored those value propositions not to customer X walking through the door, but to you guys walking through the door after talking to you for a brief moment. I think that the main issue with scripting is that you take the soul out of people that are talking to you. So if I'm going in my head and I'm going down that script, I'm not putting myself into that at all, right? I'm just reciting something that I recited 2 clients before you and 5 clients after you and everything like that. So to answer your question, what they're doing is right, but the way that they're rolling that out gives you that dead-eyed sort of approach that you just repeat over and over and over again, like that rock going right up the mountain and tumbling back down to the bottom.
So to be clear, are you saying that you don't think it makes sense because the folks that generally get hired in some of these boutiques aren't necessarily there because of passion and that's not coming through? Or are you saying that like it wouldn't matter anyway because the way these things need to be sold is so scripted and the idea of breaking out of that is so antithetical to the structure of some of these brands that it's a non-starter to begin with?
I mean, if I had the answer to that question, I would be in charge of Rolex.
Okay, fair enough.
So to answer your question, I think it's a really difficult challenge. How do you create a high-end experience across 1,000 doors globally that represents the quality of your brand and gives you the ability to have clients feel special and taken care of, while also giving people the freedom to be themselves and speak the way that they would want to speak about the watches that they're selling? And it's a challenge. It's really, really hard. But I do think that this is why, going back to your point about independent retailers, I think this is what makes each of us special. When we get together, it's 3 guys that love watches that happen to sell watches, right? Like that is a culture of its own.
Speak for yourself, Geoff.
But yeah, I hear you. And you're right. It's, in the end, I think it is probably like the difference between wanting to, like, I see my own draw to it because I like counterculture stuff. Like I want to shop at the indie record store. I want to shop at the mom and pop clothing store. Like that's the kind of thing that I'm into. That comes with other challenges. It's not as easy to get stuff. It takes longer. There's something that you do get things from a corporation that you don't get from smaller companies. That's just the reality of how that works. But it is a decision and a self-selection thing.
Yeah, there's an old truism in business. And when we worked at Facebook, this was something Mark Zuckerberg said, but he got it from someone else. And I can't believe I'm quoting Mark Zuckerberg here, but this is true. And I'm not ultimately quoting him. Every business gets to choose the way in which it sucks, right? And so what you
Mark
just
said that?
Yeah, he got that advice from someone, and he brought this up. Like, we did these Q&As, and every employee would have some gripe about something, and he was like, "Look, every company has to choose the way in which it sucks, and like, there's trade-offs there's trade-offs you have to make." But no, look, I don't want to discount that because it's
right,
true.
you're
Like
right.
when you describe like shopping at the indie clothing store or the bookstore or the record store or whatever, like obviously there's a reason to love shopping there, a reason to want to support those businesses. So many reasons. But you're right, there are trade-offs. Like they may not have the inventory, accessing it might be different. They're not discounting, things like that, right?
Sure.
And I think Patek has to choose, and all these other brands have to choose the way in which they suck. And it's like, Well, if I want to make sure that my brand is presented consistently, if I want to make sure that whether you walk into a boutique in New York or Calabasas or Geneva, the experience is uniform and there's a basic level of competence and a basic quality of the experience you can trust, well, then the way in which it's going to suck is some of it's going to be canned, right? Like that's kind of the trade-off.
Well, don't forget, before Rolex did all of this, before Rolex started interjecting itself into how their clients are treated across the world, for example, my first Rolex job, you could walk into the store, buy a Rolex for 20% off, switch the dial, add diamonds, change the bracelet, and then you walk into the next store and they say, oh no, you can't do any of that. Right? Like the reality is left to their own devices, retailers didn't do a great job of making Rolex special. And now Rolex is what it is because of what they're doing with their clients. So again, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing at all. There's a balance there.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I guess there's a parallel too, like when you look at another of the world's most valuable brands, which is Apple, right? I mean, you want to talk about consistency and, homogeneous like environments to sell, just the Apple store is the pinnacle of that. But in fairness, like there is a certain degree of the consistency leads to a clear expectation from a client, and that clear expectation is almost always met because of that consistency. Even if being an Apple retail employee, is probably not too far off from being, a Rolex salesperson, just different store, different outfit, but largely similar. There's a process to follow. There's a way to do things. And you know that because you ever walked into an Apple store and you're like, yeah, I just need to buy that. And they're like, no, sir. You go stand over at that table and that person will help you with this thing and get it to you that way. Because that's how it happens. Because that's just the system that they built. But it is a really good point that you make, which is if there's no guidance, then maybe things kind of, have the opportunity to fall apart. But of course, the counterpoint to that would be, well, but that's true sort of in the indie world. I mean, we get trained, like if we carry a brand, like we go through a rigorous training to understand everything there is to know about that brand, how it works, how it's made, but we're not being secret shopped. No one's coming in to check and see if we're actually saying that. So there's a lot of trust there too.
Yeah, but I think the mindset of the independent brands when it comes to their retail network, and I think this is changing and is evolving towards this, but I'm seeing this more and more, and particularly I'm hearing this from the brands who now approach us, which is the mainstream brands seek uniformity of experience.
Yeah.
The indie brands are taking a different approach. They want a diversified portfolio.
Yeah.
Right? Like they do want retailers who have the marble-clad showrooms and the high footfall, location in the fancy neighborhood and things like that. And by the way, there's a role for that. Like Cellini Jewelers in New York City on Park Avenue, beautiful
Geneva
boutique.
Seal in the heart of Chicago.
Cathedrals to independent watchmaking. There's a role for that, but they don't only want that or exclusively want that. They want people who are good at digital and social media. They want people who may not have the fanciest showroom, but have a deep client Rolodex. So what I see from the independent brands and their mindset about how they think about their dealer network is they view it as a diversified portfolio versus seeking, homogeneity. And there's trade-offs to each.
Sure.
But I think on each side, they're making a calculated decision. So, Geoff, I want to ask you about conversion. You had to go through your own sort of metamorphosis into an independent watch person. Have you, and I know that there are clients out there who come to independence from the world of mainstream watches. Have you ever had to, I wouldn't say convert a client because people go through this on their own and ultimately like people make a decision to buy an independent watch for their own reasons. But have you ever with a client seen a mindset shift and sort of they approach us about a watch with maybe one perspective on it, but as they get into the world of independence, their mindset around watches and watch collecting changes? Have you seen that firsthand?
Yeah, I mean that's the core of what I do. I mean, yeah, there are clients that are already attuned to independent watches, but even those clients need to be kind of exposed to more and more different things. But I think going from Rolex, Patek, Lange, Vacheron, all of these brands that, we already talked about this on the podcast already, but like having a conversation with them, justifying the way that they approach those brands, but then also shifting them internally is one of my favorite things about this job. So when you dig into a client, and we're not talking about do you like Rolex or do whatever. When you dig into a client in a way of why do you like watches? What is it about a watch that means something to you? What is it about a watch that's different than your car or your house or your shoes, right? What kind of art do you like? When you dive into those questions and you start figuring out who the person is, not just what they're looking for, it allows for this really deep and personal journey that you go on with them that ends up in independent watches. And there's a giant, sea of things over here that they can look at, some that we carry and some that we don't. But when they hit that point where they've opened their eyes to what else is out there, it's a magical moment for me because it shows that I've done my job in expressing that there's an alternative to what they see over there.
I think what really sticks out to me here, and it's part of the reason why I love this business so much, is for as profoundly different a business some of these multi-brand boutiques are, they're still the first places that I go when I go to a new town because I love watches and I love going into them, even if I'm seeing a lot of the same, references. There's a reason Gabe and I went into the Rolex boutique in Geneva because I just never been to the Rolex boutique in Geneva and I wanted to go. And at the same time, I also got an extraordinary kick out of, visiting, the Davidoffs, and you can't go as far on the other direction of the spectrum from a, sales experience as you can, as going to the Rolex boutique and then hanging out with Roy to look at watches. And I love that it doesn't have to be a binary thing. And I guess that's the big takeaway for me. And you guys were touching on it, but it's true. It is profoundly different to sell these things. It's profoundly different to buy these things, but they're not mutually exclusive. And I think that's probably the most important takeaway. Just you can't buy them the same way and you can't sell them the same way, but you can enjoy them the same way. And that's something that is really wonderful and unique about this particular art form.
All right, Asher, Geoff, should we leave it there?
Let's leave it there.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening. And more importantly, thank you for supporting independent watchmaking. None of this is possible without you. And of course, Openwork is a production of Collective Horology. You can find us and a lot of independent watches at collectivehorology.com. Please get in touch with those comments, those questions, and all that feedback. We love it. You can do that by emailing podcast@collectivehorology.com.